All right, well, let's get started with Mark chapter 7. Who wants to read?
I'll start. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he said to them, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and whoever speaks evil of father or mother must surely die. But you say that if anyone tells father or mother, 'Whatever support you might have had from me is Corban,' that is an offering to God, then you no longer permit doing anything for a father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on. And you do many things like this." Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile." When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, "Then do you also fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer?" Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, "It is what comes out of a person that defiles. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person."
Yeah, okay.
Well, he really called them out on that one.
Can't make yourself clean just by adhering to some simple letter of the law. You have to actually.
I think we can underestimate what a profound mind change that would be when you make yourself holy before God by washing and doing these rituals, and you adhere to them perfectly, and that's what you've been taught. And then Jesus comes and says, you realize that doesn't actually make any sense. Like, maybe the original intent of that was that you mindfully, as you're washing yourself and these things, you're mindfully cleansing your heart. But as many things go, you end up just doing the rituals and you think that somehow that's what God wants. Really, ultimately, it's about your heart and what's going on in your heart. So, and to me, I just think this is like, we've read it so many times and we kind of can laugh at the Pharisees, but what do we do that's like that? Mm-hmm. In what way have we been so ingrained in a certain religious practice and understanding that we're missing the original intent?
One small thing I think of is I was taught if we're praying, like especially in church, I have to fold my hands like this, I have to close my eyes, and I have to bow my head. Like, why? And then I realized as I was growing up, well, you're just supposed to be paying attention. Like, it helps you focus. Mm-hmm. But your hands don't have to be like this.
True. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still do it out of,
habit?
The focus, habit, but also out of respect of, when we're praying, it's like when we're at the dinner table, if Amy comes to the table late, we've already said grace, we'll still stop and we'll say grace with her, to help her center, and so we're mm-hmm. being respectful and not just eating while she's saying grace. And I remember this, I always think of how I have to wash my hands before I eat, but not out of a worshipful act, but just because I know about germies, and I do not want to get germs or whatever else I've been handling on my food and ingested. And,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to that point about prayer, years ago I learned that at least Jewish women will cover their eyes when they pray.
Hmm.
And I did that, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. It was like, it
Interesting.
felt so right. It was just like, what a way to block out the world and just focus internally. It felt really good. And so I actually haven't done it for a while, but you reminded me. For a while when I was alone, I would just cover my eyes when I would pray.
Why don't we pray now? We should try that.
So that you can focus. The whole point is just to be able to focus and calm
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Where did this come from? Like, was it a Deuteronomy thing that Moses started, where you have to wash your food, you have to wash your hands? Like, I'm just curious where it...
Leviticus has kind
Okay.
of like most of those laws, those fastidious laws, and so that's kind of traced back generically to Moses. It could very well have been adapted over time and made more rigorous over time. A lot of the Old Testament wasn't actually written down until like the 600s. So it was before that oral, and it would get added on to over time. And so as the priestly role grew and became more powerful and more structured and institutional, I'm sure some of the laws that went with it did too. Yeah.
And of course, with those oral laws, all it takes is just one guy who gets an idea, and it's like, let's insert this into there, and suddenly, boom, it's going to be carried on until someone else decides to add their twist to it.
Well, so there's this famous story of the woman who, you have all the generations who are in the house celebrating together, and the mother is cooking a roast, and she cuts off the ends, and she puts them on the side before she cooks it. And the little girl notices that and says, "Why do you do that?" And she goes, "I don't know, that's the way I was taught." Well, she went to her mother, who was there, and said, "Mom, why do you do that?" And the mother said, "I don't know, that's what my mom taught." And then they finally asked the great-grandmother who's there, and she goes, "Oh, my pan was never big enough." So there was a reason that she did what she did, but the reason ceased being important. And so there's something to the fact that, like, there's nothing wrong with traditions. There's nothing wrong with, like, memorizing prayers. There's nothing wrong with any of that. What can be concerning is if you feel like it's done, set in stone forever, and there's no evaluation, there's no, maybe the meaning has been lost, there's no reformation or evolution to those liturgies and processes and rituals, as if one time is good for all time, right? So, yeah, I think what Jesus is saying here probably blew a lot of minds because they just hadn't had to think about it. It just was so normal. This is what you do. Who would question this?
Should I read on?
Yeah, your favorite story.
I'll
by
go
the
through.
way.
Oh, I do hate this.
Yeah.
I forgot it was the Syrophoenician. Okay. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, or Syrophoenician, of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." Yes, I don't like the
It really
saying she's a
challenges.
dog.
Yeah.
It is hard hearing Jesus actually showing a hard heart
Mhm.
at some point. I mean, this passage almost goes to show. I mean, it does go to show that he was as susceptible to falling into some of the way of thinking as the rest of us are. But she actually changed his mind with just a simple statement of faith in him, and showing that you can be outside of the Jewish faith in this case and still be a child of God. And I always thought that of was always taught, who was my neighbor? Everyone was my neighbor. So Jesus was reaching out to the Gentiles and such. And in this case, it would seem about to turn this Gentile away, or Sycophesian or whatever. But it's like, no, you're right. If you have faith, I'm not going to stop you. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. So in his mind, he was probably trying to guide and reform the Jewish faith. And this might have been a time in which he was getting a respite. He was going away from the crowds where he was not going to be intruded upon. Now, there's two things to Jesus' credit. Like, he is initially wrong, right, in the way he talks to her. But that was a cultural conditioning. Syrophoenicians are like, Gentiles were called dogs by Jewish people. She's a woman, and he at least lets her talk. And she speaks up, and he doesn't admonish her for speaking, and then he changes his mind. To me, that's really, really powerful, that he had enough humility within himself to change his mind. And then we see the curing of the deaf man is in Gentile territory. And the feeding of the 4,000 is in Gentile territory. Mm-hmm. So she changed his mind, and he completely changed trajectory and was like, maybe my work is bigger than just with the Jewish people. And I feel like as much as he was wrong, there's something cool about this story, because in some ways it can teach us that maybe it's not a sin to be wrong, it's a sin to refuse to learn and change. And that he was completely open to learning something new.
Is she the first Gentile healing in Mark?
I think so.
Oh, that
I
is
think so.
interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
I seem to recall having a similar discussion with Pastor Scott when we talked about this section too. This was kind of a changing of his course from focusing on the Jews to reaching out beyond the Jews as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, I mean, I shouldn't be too surprised about that. I'm sure many others have had similar conversations even long before our time and such. But
yeah. And the last thing I want to point out is that I wonder if one of the reasons why Jesus didn't want people to talk about his healings and stuff is because that wasn't really his end game. It was to be known as this great healer and to have it be about him. He wanted to make people well because he cared about them. But he knew that if the word spread, that everyone was just going to see him as miracle worker. Oh, show me something cool, and then it would become about reality TV show for him, right? Instead of what he came to show about God. That's my wondering. I don't know if it's right, but
makes me think of one of the songs that we sing a little bit differently. Where I forget which song it is, but yeah, we talk about you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper. That is who you are, and it's like. But do we? Yeah, I need to look back at that song and the words in that and think about that.
I say we still have a tendency to want to think of Jesus as a vending machine.
Yeah, we sure.
And we think that's what he wants. That's what Christianity is coming and just talking about how great Jesus is, right?
This gets into your sermon from today about not looking in the right light. And I mean, he was never talking about him. He was always trying to point people to God and saying, this is what God wants you to do.
Yeah.
Does someone else want
That's
to read?
interesting.
If we're moving.
Sure.
Yeah, let's move on.
So we got to the deaf man, so 8. In those days when there was again a great crowd without anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. His disciples replied, How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. They ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute. And they distributed them to the crowd. They had also a few small fish, and after blessing them, he ordered that these 2 should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, asking him for a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting to the boat again, he went across to the other side. The yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. They said to one another, It is because we have no bread. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 7. Then he said to them, Do you not yet understand?
No.
No.
No, we don't get it. Or what?
And I can see why they didn't. Like, in some ways, I can see how he would have been so frustrated.
Not to mention they're probably really hungry. It's
Yeah.
just their brains are all mush right now.
You've got a good point there. But yeah, reading this bit of the 4,000, feeding the 4,000, they ask, well, how are we to feed them? And it's like, well, granted, to us it was just a few passages ago, but to them it was probably weeks ago, months ago. But still, I would think that it would have been like a shocker once, but the second time it's like, okay.
You think it would have made an impression on the
Yeah. Do it again, Lord.
It's interesting that people miss stuff, right? Like they'll overemphasize one thing Jesus does, and then they'll completely miss something else. So he does another miracle, and the significance of the 7 baskets is it's not like we had 12 before in Jewish territory, 12 tribes, 12 disciples, very Jewish number. 7 is more of a number of like completion. Like we've completed it, and so it's kind of cool that that's how much they have left over. But that could have just been the day before, because this does kind of move quickly. So the Pharisees, who would have, if they weren't there watching this miracle, would have heard about it, and yet they asked for a sign, and Jesus is like, what are you expecting? Because I really think that there are times where we can be so skeptical that we will not believe what we see with our own eyes. And I think that happens. You can have all of us in the room witness something, and we're going to have that many versions of what happened. And one person will be like, it was a miracle, and someone's like, And that's just how we are. And I think their hardness of heart of being unable to see what's in front of them, Jesus is warning about that. Don't be like that, Their yeast is going to grow in you, and you're going to end up being like them, where you're cynical and you can't see what's in front of them. And of course they misunderstand, and they take him too literally. Are you talking about bread? What bread?
I want bread.
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I also think it was funny. They'd forgotten to bring any bread. They had 1 loaf.
I
They have some, just not enough.
Granted, yeah, it's not going to go over. I mean, a journey across the lake will take a day, or
I think it's probably a translation issue. That's because in English it comes across as, but they do have some, just not enough.
yeah.
So maybe in the original it doesn't sound quite so contradictory.
But also, could Jesus not do the miracle again for them?
No?
They
That's a
brought
good
1
question.
bread, and if they were really, really hungry, could Jesus not make that 1 bread enough for all of them? Yeah. Like he already did it, right? And I think it's, I heard a pastor give a really good sermon about this was like stewardship. It's a story of scarcity, that our minds are trained to be worried and to see what we don't have, to see the lack.
Yeah.
And yet we can have evidence of the opposite happening. And she told this great story of a potluck where everyone was freaking out because they invited so many members of the community, and they brought food, and they swear they didn't have enough. And they were running around like, gonna call Domino's, all sorts of things like that. And then lo and behold, there was enough. In fact, people were taking food home, and all that worry and lack and scarcity that had been drilled into their minds, she was like, that was a really, really good moment for me to realize that we don't actually see what is. We're so worried about lack and scarcity, which has been a survival piece. But in the evidence of the opposite, of enoughness and abundance, you can actually miss that. So there's something here about, if you're my disciples, you need to retrain your mind away from lack and scarcity and cynicism and towards abundance and hope and possibility of what could be.
You look at the tactics and some of the politics of the past, for quite a long time. And that's one of the biggest scare tactics, is talking about the scarcity. If we let the migrants come in, they're going to take your jobs, and they're going to take our the funds that we have available for public services, and there won't be anything left for our citizens because we got to take care of all these migrants coming in.
The illegals, you mean?
Yeah.
The illegals, yes.
Yeah,
hate
the
it.
illegals.
The
Right,
illegals.
right.
It had to be called that.
Yeah, I avoid those that term of like
I know.
the
It's
migrants.
maddening.
Those who are the migrants and immigrants, those who are coming in. I mean, look at us, people. We are the results of immigrants and migrants. I mean,
Right, and that is a fear of people, and they tap into that, oh, they're going to take away my jobs, they're going to take away food, whatever.
and at the same time, we're hearing about all these companies that are desperately looking for people who are willing to work for them
Yeah, that's
at
a
the
really,
rates they're willing to pay.
really interesting point about how power tells us to be afraid, and that's how it keeps itself in power.
Mm-hmm.
But so many different successful religious and particularly monastic orders have emphasized asceticism and being comfortable with little, and it's okay to not have it. Don't worry. You see it a lot in Buddhism too.
Yeah.
Like it's okay. Just you're going to be okay.
And the flip side of that is, what would it look like if we really truly thought about abundance in a way that benefited all?
Mm-hmm.
So we were not glorifying poverty,
Right.
nor afraid of poverty, but rather working towards having leftovers and everybody had enough to eat. To me, that's a very different mindset than, because Jesus was not an ascetic.
No,
John the
no.
Baptist was.
Yes.
But Jesus was not an ascetic. And he got flack for that, in Luke at least. Because what holy man is having parties drinking wine? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather be making wine at the wedding feast than be like the Cathars who wanted to get rid of everything fleshly.
Yeah, no fun. Let's not have any joy here.
Yes.
Then we'll be holy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to keep going?
Sure. Let's see, where was I? Jesus cures a blind man at Bethsaida. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again. He looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." Peter's declaration about Jesus. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Jesus foretells his death and resurrection. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." And he said to them, "Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power."
So the man at Bethsaida,
Mm-hmm.
why did he do it twice? What is he trying to say there? He didn't need to do it twice to heal his sight. It's like he did it halfway,
Mm-hmm.
and then he did it all the way.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm. The one theory I've heard, which I'm not a huge fan of, is that he's not actually coming down from the mountain, but it's like the closest he gets to Jerusalem, the more he loses his power.
Mm.
I don't know. We'll see if that pans out, and I don't know why that would be.
He's done miracles in Jerusalem before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not like there's something special about Jerusalem, except that this time when he's going there, he will die.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the final time. But I honestly, I don't really get that. There is another idea that, the blind man does beg Jesus to heal him, so that's important to really actually want the healing. Because if someone didn't want a healing, Jesus probably wouldn't try to heal him, and it may not even work. The body might just go, no, I resist this healing energy. But maybe there was something in him, or maybe this is just showing how even Jesus, metaphorically, Jesus can be with you and lay his hands on you, and you still might not be able to see perfectly because, I don't know, Jesus can't make you fully understand, right?
Well, there's a strong trend throughout all of these healings that your faith is critical to it. So maybe the message here is that faith can be a journey. It's not something that necessarily has to happen in one go. It can take a while.
Maybe it takes a couple times to really see what it
Maybe
is.
Jesus has the patience to stay with you through it.
Yeah, I
That's
like that.
Interesting. And while I think that there's got to be something we to discuss in the fact that the disciples don't want him to go through the punishment and the getting killed because of the way that they want him to basically be the one to cast out the Romans and such. And
Well, that's what's going to suck.
yeah. The thing that really this is the impulsive person in me is, why did they start verse 9 in the
I know.
last few sentences
I don't
of
like
this
when they do that.
section instead of at the beginning of the Transfiguration? It just-
Yeah.
That is so
That's
annoying.
just
Yeah.
jarring to me. They're starting the chapter at the last few passages of the previous story. What?
Well, these numbers weren't added were added much later.
Yes, yeah.
Just don't get why they
And
did
I think
it that way.
these numbers didn't originate with the English translation either. Did they even originate with the Greek? Or were they added
I'm not
like in
sure.
the Vulgate? Or
That's a great question.
I wonder who came. At what point somebody decided where the verses start?
Yeah, but the fact of this, it's not even the words; it's the content that they're declaring, this chapter to have started at the tail end of instead of waiting for the next content.
Yeah.
But
It's very awkward.
Yeah.
What's the implication there, though? Like, so
I have words.
at the end of 8,
prepared.
those who are ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes
Mm-hmm.
in the glory. What-
I know.
Does that
it's
mean,
kinda
like, okay,
brutal.
he comes back, and then what? Like, there is an accounting.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of
And
taking
a
that as we could
judgment.
tell ourselves. Like, if we're ashamed of him, that's kind of maybe reflect back on us. But I don't know if that's what is meant. I mean, this is a very confusing passage.
will does this speak to some of those people who think that some of these teachings are just too woke? I mean, I don't want to.
Or people that don't
Intuitive
believe at
honest
all,
on this
you
one.
know? Like, is this non-believers, or if you're not,
Okay.
you're not believing
Okay.
the right way?
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
what is the implication of him being ashamed at that point?
Okay. To be crucified was a very shameful thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was, you're publicly executed naked, and usually you're considered a traitor, and it's a very kind of slanderous thing. So it's bad news, and it would have been seen as a failure and as complete, like, shame upon, and this is a shame honor system. So anyone associated with Jesus would feel that sense of shame on them as well. So for Jesus, this is really interesting actually. For Jesus to say, look, what you understand about who I am and what I'm here to do, and shame and honor and success and failure is all wrong. It's all upside down. And so I'm coming here to be on the cross, and there's so many implications of what the cross might mean, right? But what it doesn't mean is that he's a bad guy and this is a failure, which is exactly what everybody would think. So something else is happening. And as we see, the disciples will run away. They'll be scared. They'll be confused. Peter will deny him 3 times because he's ashamed and he's scared. So that it's real, that sense of being ashamed to follow someone who's so weak that he cannot overcome and overpower and be the strong one. That's actually really powerful, because some of the things I see on Facebook that are like, I'm not ashamed of you, Jesus, and they'll be like, share if you agree, and they kind of pass this around, often come from people who also are very invested in Jesus being, my God can beat up your God. Jesus is the end-all be-all. He's, God is powerful and strong, and it's putting all of this super toxic masculine energy.
It's another washing your hands thing. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess that makes sense. I was thinking about it in terms of the second coming, and he's talking about, like, the crucifixion, resurrection.
I think so. I also think there's something to, I like the version that the second coming is really, we're in it now because we all have Christ in us.
Yeah.
And this is hard, but like there are people in this world, like homeless people, that we're taught to walk by and maybe make us feel ashamed. And those are the very people we're supposed to have compassion for, that Jesus is in them, right? So in some ways you could almost say that Jesus is like, for as humiliating as it will be for you to know that your leader's on a cross, when you look at humiliation, that's where I am. Wherever, like, the down in the dumps, hitting rock bottom, that's where I am. And if you can't go there within yourself and with other people, you don't get who I am. Like, I'm willing to go into hell. I'm willing to go into darkness. I'm willing to sit in the darkest spots, because that's the only way salvation can actually happen. Like, you can't get better.
Well, true.
Like, if you go to therapy, right, you can't get better if you're not saying the total truth, right? If you're not being completely brutally honest about what's going on inside. And only when you shine light on the darkest parts of you and work through that can you start to get better, or there's always something holding you down. And that's another metaphor for the cross, is like, going into the depths, the darkest parts, revealing the absolute dirtiest secrets of humanity, and still love and grace is there. And if you can't do that, which, that's really hard for humans. Who wants to do that? Who wants to feel humiliation and shame? And we want to be successful and strong, right?
So I'm sort of following, but then what does he mean by that he will be ashamed of them? Like, he's never ashamed of other people, I don't think.
Honestly, I think it's a attention grabber, and it's maybe a wordplay.
Okay.
Because if they're listening to him, the last thing they'd want is for Jesus to be ashamed of them and to turn his head away. They'd be like, no, no, no. If you're really who we think you are, we would never want that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we need to take this literally, because I'm with you.
Okay.
I don't think God's ever turns up God's nose at people. But sometimes Jesus does use these kind of things like this to make people second guess their assumptions and what they've been thinking about.
Okay.
Because the disciples do run away. Jesus or Peter
Right.
does deny.
Yeah.
And Jesus comes back,
Right.
and he comes back to them.
Mm-hmm.
He returns to them knowing what they've done. So he doesn't say, "I'm ashamed of you all. You guys are awful." He doesn't say that.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't say anything. He says, in fact, I'm going to hang out with you for a little bit more, and then I'm going to send you out on the world. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And there's,
Right.
That is
Yeah.
a
If
really
there's anyone
interesting-
he should have been ashamed of, it would have been
It's-
him. Yeah.
and I think that's the
And he's
beauty
not.
of these stories is when we see the disciples fail, we understand the depth. We see how everyone failed. We see the depth of God's love and forgiveness and grace, that it's not contingent on us at all. Now, some people will say, well, Jesus was just humble and nice on earth, but when he comes again, he's going to be this
Yeah.
butt whooping thing. Did you guys ever see UHF with
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Weird Al.
Weird Al, this movie from the 80s?
No, I didn't see
Oh,
that.
yes.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
It's
the-
hilarious, and there's a scene where it's like they're making Gandhi too. And except this time he's got guns and he does karate and he's got all these women on his side, and it's just so it's ridiculous, and it just shows you how hilarious our ideas can
No more
be.
Mr. Peaceful Resistance or something like that.
And some people think that about Jesus. They think that he
Oh,
was
yeah.
just pretending to be humble on earth, but when he comes back, sheep, goats, brr, hell, and destruction, and I'm ashamed of you. They, without realizing that this is who actually God is, and so I think if he comes again in the second coming, this is more of just a warning, rethink what you think is shameful and what you think is failure.
I just cringe every time I
really
see
interesting
this
reading. I
God
like
guns
that.
Trump thing. It's
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
one of these
yeah.
things doesn't belong in there, and it saddens me which one doesn't belong.
Yeah.
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 Yes.
The other thing about this passage, of course, is it gets used so often to justify martyrdom.
Mm.
Like it
Mm-hmm.
for centuries.
So the best way I can understand this is if I'm living as integritous as I possibly can be, and I'm feeling like, look, this is my truth, this is what I understand. And I share a lot of my thoughts with you guys. And if you ever felt like you're off the beaten track, you're wrong, the Bible says this, the church constitution, or Luther says this, right? And worst case scenario, there have been people who've gone against the church's teachings in some ways, or they've just had a different point of view, and that's not what people wanted to hear. And in worst case scenarios, they've experienced persecution. That, to me, if they genuinely feel like that is what they believe, and they're getting punishment for it, to me, that is much more of this cross thing. It's you're doing what you think is right, and no one understands. and you're being hurt because of it, or slandered, or people are saying things that aren't, they're misunderstanding you, or they're saying things that aren't true, or I can see how that could be, take up your cross and you just kind of have to suffer through it. I feel like Martin Luther King Jr. is an example of that, where he was doing what he absolutely felt was right, and he got a lot of pushback, right? People get pushback with new ideas or by standing firm for things. But it certainly isn't, God wants you to suffer. It's not that at all.
No.
Yeah.
You look like you have a thought, Ben.
No, I guess that answers my question.
How much time do we have? My Fitbit's
It's
dead.
11:46.
Okay. Well, do we want to just read through the Transfiguration and be done for the day?
Sure. 6 days later, Jesus took with them Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus.
How would they have even known it was Elijah and Moses? Like, how would they have known what they looked like?
Very good question.
Name tags? I don't
We got a
know.
big staff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Name tags.
Yeah, name tags.
Moses had horns or something. I don't know.
Maybe it's like in a dream where you just somehow know.
Yeah.
You know?
Can be.
I just
And-
feel like this is a Tide commercial.
Yeah.
Why tie? Oh, because the lighter the
bleach.
white. Okay.
Practically glowing.
Yeah, that's a good point though with the dream. And it does say other parts of the Bible that Jesus' flock will know when they see him. I guess as part of the flock, they also recognized Moses and Elijah. But
I love it. Like, Peter just had no idea what to even do or say, so let's make dwelling. Like, that's so human to just be so no clue what's going on.
well, you gotta do
Brain
something.
broke, just
but
babble.
Yeah.
Part of that is that if you created a dwelling, it would be like a place for the divine beings to dwell and to stay. So you're creating a permanent structure, hoping you're
Stay.
able to capture it. And I think part of it was just like, again, that's an old idea. You know, they're leaving, they're gone, and they're not going to just stay up there.
Stay.
It's kind of a Greek thing, right? You make a temple to all the gods. And
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah,
I suppose.
definitely.
maybe that's not where he was going. But
You see a vision, so you put a bunch of stones there to mark it as like a holy place. People have been doing that forever.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, declaring that the place that Jacob had slept is Bethany, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Put a bunch of
Right,
rocks up there.
right.
Weren't the Jews always wanting? Wasn't Elijah the one they were always putting a place for at
Mhm.
Passover
Yep.
too?
Yeah.
So seeing Elijah come back would have been a really big deal.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
let alone Moses. And,
Yeah.
well, you've already got Jesus here too, but you're still trying to wrestle with that part.
Yep.
Elijah coming back must have felt like the end times a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And we kind of read that in this next thing where Jesus basically says that, yeah, John the Baptist pretty much was Elijah. And there's some people who believe that just from the way Jesus talks that he did think that his coming and being here on earth in his ministry was going to usher in a change. That there might be an end. And maybe that's why the early church was so obsessed with the second coming. I mean, really obsessed with it. Because they really actually thought it was going to happen any day. And maybe Jesus himself thought that might happen. which is interesting.
Well, Jesus
Yeah.
did say that. I think it was even in somewhere in this passage, but saying that I tell you the truth, some among you will not see their final days before they
Exactly.
see the instant coming of the Son of Man.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Mark wouldn't have been written so far away that some of the people who were alive when Jesus was alive weren't still alive. So there was still that strong hope that it was going to happen any minute now, any minute now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe, so that lends credence to the theory that you have and I have as well. I mean, we are the resurrection of Jesus and
Mhm.
being the embodiment of his teachings, and
Mhm.
that he
Right.
gave us the instruction. And while we ourselves don't think any of us have Jewish blood in us, at least not a significant amount. We are still living out his teachings and trying to follow as best we can. So
Mhm. 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 All right.